What's up, my fellow clout givers? We're doing things a bit differently today. Normally, I like talking about bad video game takes from other people, but today, we're talking about what is perhaps the worst review of Spider-Man across the Spiderverse. This review by Anomaly Inc. is very misleading and misses the point entirely on a very big plot point in the movie. To top it off, when he is faced with criticism, he makes a follow-up that is pretty much just 16 minutes of copium and deflection. To summarize Anomaly's biggest problem with Spider-Verse, he takes major issue with the canon event plotline in the movie, saying that it is incredibly contrived and forced. We're going to talk about why this take of his is very dumb and how he gets a lot of things wrong, especially on other things like Miguel O'Hara, Miles, Spot, the Spider Society, and the time frame of these events happening. Just a quick warning, this video will be very heavy on spoilers, so if you have not seen this movie and you don't want to be spoiled, I would advise clicking off the video now. Otherwise, grab some popcorn, grab a drink, sit back and relax, and let's dive into this terrible review of Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse.
Across the Spiderverse is one of the dumbest plot holes of all time. And what I'm referring to, as some of you can no doubt guess, is the quote-unquote canon event breaking rule, which the word ironic doesn't even begin to do justice to. That certain events must be allowed to take place in the multiverse to prevent the space-time continuum from collapsing. Meaning there's constants for each and every single Spider-Person in the multiverse that needs to happen. It's predetermined, it can't be meddled with, otherwise everything will fall apart. This is such a pathetically contrived plot device that's trying to force conflict into the film.
Canon events were established way before Spider-Verse even came out. Although ambiguous and not exactly written, there are literal universes that prove this point. In Earth 616, which is the mainline universe of the entire Marvel series, there are two clones of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. These two characters embody the concept of what if Peter Parker did not go through any traumatic events. Ben Reilly goes his own path with the identity of the Scarlet Spider, later to be known as Chasm, and he renounces the name of Spider-Man. And Kane Parker is a genetic defect who Peter Parker quotes has all the power and none of the responsibility. There are also alternate universes involving Spider-Man not going through specific canon events. For example, one universe involves Flash Thompson becoming Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker, and as a result, Flash accidentally kills Peter Parker and then turns himself in to the police. Another universe involves Ben Parker becoming Spider-Man, but in this universe, both Peter Parker and Aunt May are horrifically killed by a different version of Green Goblin after his identity was revealed to him. Those are just a few examples of how canon events could have been a thing before Across the Spider-Verse established them. In the comics, there are also Spider Totems, which are celestial entities who deem whoever is worthy of becoming Spider-Man, or rather, their avatars. The bottom line is, in order for someone to become Spider-Man, they must suffer a traumatic event of some sort. Stan Lee himself is on record saying that Spider-Man was made to be one of the more relatable superheroes out there. In short, he's a little guy who has to deal with big problems, which further supports the fact that he has to go through these canon events like Uncle Ben dying.
And this all starts in Mumbattan when Miles Morales saves the police captain that was meant to die in that moment, because according to Across the Spider-Verse, a police captain close to Spider-Man supposedly dies in every single Spider-Man universe.
It doesn't have to specifically be a police captain. It has to be a person that is very close to Spider-Man. It could be Uncle Ben, or Gwen Stacy, or Aunt May, or a police captain. The death of a police captain in this specific universe is just an example that Miguel brought up to prove a point for his theory around canon events. Another example to support this is Tom Holland's Spider-Man in No Way Home, where Peter Parker chooses to sacrifice everything in order to restore peace and get back his secret identity. This could be considered as Tom Holland's canon event.
Okay, there is so much wrong with this, and I'll get to it momentarily, but first of all, the use of the term canon in this movie is so cringe.
They are the canon. Canon events are the connections that bind our lives together. Inspector Singh's death was a canon event. It's what happens when you break the canon.
I mean, what else could you call it? It makes sense that they would coin this term since both Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse are a bit self-aware when it comes to their meta, and are very self-referential. Even in the comics, Miguel O'Hara is the one to discover an event known as the Temporal Paradox. In Earth 2099, he would travel back in time to warn Peter Parker in Earth 616 that the current timeline was destabilizing. Canon events are not really anything new in Spider-Verse, as this has been a recurring thing in the comics.
And second of all, the circumstances surrounding the would-be death of Inspector Singh completely contradict the very idea that that was a canon event, since the only reason it almost happened in the first place was because the Spot, a multiverse anomaly like Miles, invaded Mumbattan from across the multiverse and caused that universe's super collider to malfunction and the Alchemax building to collapse, which, without their invasion, wouldn't have killed Inspector Singh otherwise.
I'm not going to respond to this yet because this is something he'll bring back up, but we will respond to this momentarily.
Miles meddling in a quote-unquote canon event is what gains him an audience with Miguel O'Hara, aka Spider-Man 2099. Gwen Stacy takes him to the lobby where the Spider Society resides, and we get introduced to hundreds and hundreds of Peter Parkers and Spider-Man variants from across the multiverse, including some very unwelcome cameos from other continuities, most notably Donald Glover as the MCU's highly speculated Prowler from his minor role in Spider-Man Homecoming that was never officially confirmed, and unfortunately now meaning the Spider-Verse film series shares continuity with the ever sharply declining MCU.
I don't really understand how this is a problem, as you have stated yourself that this is part of the movie establishes the entire multiverse composed of spider people. If anything, you should have seen it coming that this movie would by proxy be connected to the MCU. Coming to the conclusion that the Spider-Verse is somehow entirely separate from the MCU is pretty confusing, and it gives me the impression that you don't really know how the multiverse works.
Wonderful! More on that later on. But this film also tries to butter up the audience with the inclusions of canons they know the audience will actually enjoy seeing referenced, like the Spider-Man PS4 game, Spectacular Spider-Man, as well as the Raimi and Mark Webb Spider-Man films. But this also raises a ton of issues that I'm about to mention, and excuse me for taking my time with this because I'm really setting the stage here, but keep that all in mind as we finally come to the meeting of Miles Morales and Miguel O'Hara. Miguel tells Miles about the canon events that every Spider-Man must go through, how a police captain in this instance must die at a certain point in the timeline, and then in order to sell this as an actual constant throughout the multiverse, they show the death of Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy with Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker from The Amazing Spider-Man 1, which is so forced and so ridiculous and honestly disgusting that they would very disingenuously use one of the only other few continuities where a police captain close to Spider-Man unceremoniously dies, and he doesn't even die the right way as described for the canon event. Dennis Leary's Captain Stacy gets stabbed, not crushed.
The police captain that died in the comic and the one that dies in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 take place in entirely separate universes. Miguel never stated that the police captain has to die in the exact same way. He simply states that it was an event that was destined to happen during a battle against Spider-Man's arch nemesis. I must reiterate that the police captain dying from falling rubble is just one example that Miguel gave to prove a point for his theory around canon events.
And use this reference as a means of pretending like this is a normal thing that happens in Spider-Man's journey? That this has to happen, that it must happen, that it's predetermined to happen, which would explain why it happens so often in Spider-Man stories when A, it actually doesn't, and B, this is flat out fucking ridiculous.
This one's just a flat out lie, as every issue of Spider-Man has terrible events happen to Peter Parker. If one event like Uncle Ben doesn't happen, another will. This gives me the impression that you don't understand the concept of what Spider-Man's supposed to be, or have never read a Spider-Man comic. Also, for something that doesn't happen often, the movie showcases quite a few examples of said canon events happening. It's not like Miles himself had a canon event happen in the previous movie, right?
But hey, wouldn't you know it, this is why Miles' dad is getting promoted to police captain, and was a heavily emphasized part of the story that took up a whole hefty chunk of screen time earlier on, when everyone was probably screaming internally for, hey, Lord and Miller, can you hurry the fuck up with the plot and get to the shit that matters?
Part of the charm of any Spider-Man issue is that Spider-Man must keep his secret identity. The beginning section that involves Miles Morales is him getting into a bunch of arguments with his parents, and that Miles is afraid of telling them outright that he is, in fact, Spider-Man. Maintaining this balance is part of Miles' character arc, so to imply that this section of the movie doesn't matter is pretty moronic and disingenuous, especially coming from somebody who is self-admittedly a huge fan of Raimi's Spider-Man film.
But all this has been done to forcefully manufacture the drama of Miles having to choose whether or not to let his father die and creating a conflict between him, Miguel O'Hara, and the Spider Society, which wouldn't have fucking taken place otherwise.
My dad is about to be captain. Like you took everything from me.
When does it happen?
In 2 days. When he's sworn in.
The actual fuck. Promoting Miles' dad out of nowhere just to force him into this contrived plot point that breaks so much canon, ironically enough, because the death of a police captain is a now 100% must-happen canon event that needs to take place in every single Spider-Man continuity?
Once again, it does not have to specifically be a police captain. It has to be somebody that is very close to Spider-Man.
That this film stupidly tries retroactively to be a part of. Gee, where's the footage of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man failing to save Captain Stacy? His universe is still intact. Where's the footage of the MCU's Tom Holland Spider-Man failing to save his Captain Stacy? Oh, that's right, it never fucking happened.
Now this part right here is extremely dishonest, and this is coming from someone who is actually a relatively new viewer of the Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi. The main theme around Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is that Peter Parker did not want to reveal his identity. The moment he got comfortable with that towards people like MJ, that puts their lives at risk. When Peter's identity is revealed to MJ, Harry Osborn, who was formerly Peter's best friend, used that against him in order to sabotage his relationship with her. And with that same risk, Eddie Brock would also put MJ's life in danger when he contracted the symbiote. On top of this, the police captain in the Raimi films is not close to Spider-Man at all. Tom Holland's Spider-Man has suffered a lot of things as well. He suffered the loss of Tony Stark, who was like his mentor in the MCU, and in No Way Home, he suffers the loss of Aunt May, and at the end of the movie, sacrifices everything in order to fix the damage that Mysterio had done, as well as Doctor Strange's spell that was tampered with. Peter Parker in the MCU no longer exists because Peter made that sacrifice to make himself known as Spider-Man, and Spider-Man only. Another thing to point out is that in No Way Home, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man points out that when he got his revenge on the man that killed his uncle, aka the Sandman, it did not make him feel better. His attempt at revenge in Spider-Man 3 can be considered one of his canon events, as well as everything else I just mentioned. For someone who absolutely praises the first Spider-Man movie, you of all people should understand this. And yet, here we are.
You know what is a far more consistent tragic event that takes place in Spider-Man continuities that even this movie acknowledges? The death of Gwen Stacy.
In every other universe, Gwen Stacy falls for Spider-Man. And in every other universe, it doesn't end well.
They were happy to reference the Amazing Spider-Man continuity, and the death of Captain Stacy. Gwen Stacy, however, also dies in that movie's sequel. Would that not be considered a quote-unquote canon event that cannot be broken? Which is funny because I don't seem to remember the space-time continuing collapsing when Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man managed to save his Gwen Stacy from falling, because he's such an absolute Chad, he didn't need a do-over like Garfield did. Shots fucking fired!
Yes, Gwen Stacy dying in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 can be considered a canon event. That doesn't mean it has to apply to every single universe, because a canon event could be anything. The reason Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was able to save Gwen Stacy in his universe is that he ended up suffering a lot of other things. He lost his best friend, his relationship with MJ was sabotaged, he almost died a few times, and he lost himself to the point that he killed the man that killed his uncle. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man went down on a very dark path, and it ended up putting him through a lot of dire consequences for his actions. It's also the fact that Gwen Stacy in that movie is not Spider-Man's love interest. This is why his canon events are not exactly the same. Even in Across the Spider-Verse, Gwen Stacy had the same exact situation where she lost her best friend, which was Peter Parker.
But they didn't use that because they knew they couldn't use that, because whole canon-breaking bullshit is such an idiotic plot device that breaks continuity and was a complete load of crap to begin with, designed to force a bunch of very idiotic drama to happen. And the reason they didn't use the traumatic event of a Spider-Man's uncle dying instead, which is a far more constant event that keeps happening in the multiverse, is because Miles already had his traumatic loss and character development with his uncle, with the death of his uncle Aaron in the first Spider-Verse. It's like, oh, we can't use that, so I don't know, let's just shove his dad into the mix and create this really contrived plot fucking canon event nonsense to justify it.
Miguel's exposition regarding canon events does in fact bring up the death of Uncle Aaron as one of them, but despite this, Miles' dad is another factor of a canon event that Miguel deems as something that needs to happen. To use your own argument against you, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man already suffered the loss of Uncle Ben, but despite that, he still lost his best friend Harry Osborn. Now I ask of you, how do you counter this argument?
To use the Amazing Spider-Man 1 as an example, Captain Stacy's death was tragic but also earned. Trying to retroactively tie it in with this canon event-breaking nonsense plotline as some predetermined thing that has to happen in every timeline is not only nonsensical, but it ruins the very thing about the multiverse that makes it such a unique concept to explore, which is that any scenario can exist. Yes, there are some similarities, sure, but they aren't binding the fabric of the multiverse together. That's just fucking retarded.
He never really explains how it ruins the concept of the multiverse or how it's nonsensical. He kinda just says that it is and doesn't go into detail. The reason why the canon events bind the multiverse together in Miguel's theory is because when you violate the canon, you destabilize the timeline. It's established that the nodes in this multiverse are the chapters of every Spider-Man, and if you tamper with that, everything goes haywire. Miguel's own anecdotal experience with breaking the canon showcases this, as he replaced a dead version of himself in his own universe, and by replacing a dead version of himself with his current self, that creates a continuity error. Hence, this is why his universe ends up dying. Miguel is basically making sure that the timelines are stable, and that if it's not kept in check, the multiverse could collapse.
The similarities in various universes are not meant to be the product of some grand design that eliminates the mystique of each universe, as well as what makes each Spider-Man and their respective journeys unique and special.
Except you're acting like this grand design means everything a Spider-Man goes through has to be the exact same as everyone else, when that obviously isn't the case.
The similarities are meant to be a product of sheer coincidence and nothing more. That's why retroactively trying to tie all these multiverse stories and Spider-Man continuities in with this canon event concept has the polar opposite desired effect.
Speak for yourself, buddy.
By trying to tie everything together in the most succulent sense of irony, you've opened up more problematic holes than Spot himself, who is also a deliciously ironic villain given what this movie tries to do and ultimately allows it to backfire spectacularly on itself.
How can an anomaly be responsible for a canon event? Quite simple, really. The Collider. Everything that's leading up to the potential death of Inspector Singh was caused by the explosion of Alchemax's Super Collider. Kind of like that same Super Collider in Miles' universe. In fact, the reason why all of this is happening to begin with is because of that Super Collider in Miles' universe. Because remember, Kingpin's goal with that Super Collider was to take his family from another dimension into this universe. But when Green Goblin shoved Spider-Man into the beam of the Collider, that resulted in several Spider people showing up in that universe. Either way, the Super Collider exploded. That's what led up to this point. This is the same thing that has happened in Paviter's universe.
And on every other Spider-Man continuity that it tries to be a part of. And speaking of those other continuities, this gets even worse. While Miguel is divulging all this exposition to Miles, all the different Peter Parkers slowly close in around Miles to trap him from escaping because they all agree with Miguel O'Hara that he can't save his own father and they won't allow him to. Even the friendships he made in the original Spider-Verse, all of a sudden every single one of them is just in on this lunacy except Miles.
Now this is something that Anomaly is going to bring up a lot in this video, as well as the follow-up video. And the funniest part about this is that there is one person that goes against Anomaly's entire argument that he conveniently never brings up, and that is Spider-Punk. Spider-Punk is a man that goes against Miguel's standpoint entirely, and he was only there to help Miles out in this situation. Spider-Punk's biggest trait in the movie is that he is a rebel, and he is also a pretty big factor on Miles escaping the Spider Society in the first place.
And so Miles, logically, fires back with the question of what if this was Uncle Ben? What if it meant saving Uncle Ben or maybe having the multiverse collapse because of this canon-breaking nonsense?
Good question.
And then Peter B. Parker, of all people, talks about how Uncle Ben and his death from the perspective of a comic book nerd trying to summarize the character of Spider-Man, rather than from the perspective of Spider-Man himself, saying that without Uncle Ben, so many Spider-Men and women wouldn't exist.
No, Peter B. Parker was talking about the importance of Uncle Ben's death from the perspective of being Spider-Man. He says verbatim, if not for Uncle Ben, most of us wouldn't be here. Us obviously refers to spider people. I honestly don't even know how you came to this conclusion that he is talking about from the perspective of a comic book nerd. That just makes no sense.
Completely glossing over the fact that the whole reason Uncle Ben's death happens in the first place is because of Peter being irresponsible with his powers, which led to the death of his uncle happening, which profoundly changes him and his whole outlook on life. Not some prophetic, all-encompassing canon bullshit.
This is not always true. Uncle Ben's death sometimes has different time frames in different issues of Spider-Man. He could die way before Peter even becomes Spider-Man, he could potentially not die at all, and any other scenario imaginable. This is why Peter B. Parker says most of us wouldn't be here if not for Uncle Ben, because it obviously does not apply to every single Spider-Person. The much bigger factor of how Uncle Ben influences Spider-Man is the quote of "with great power comes great responsibility."
The whole reason Spider-Man exists is to make sure the death of Uncle Ben never happens again, or at least trying his damnedest to.
It's almost like that's the entire point of when Miles goes against Miguel regarding canon events, and he doesn't want his dad to die like his uncle did, right?
And now Peter B. Parker, Penny Parker, and Gwen Stacy, and all the other Spider-Men and women in the Spider Society turn on Miles to try and stop him from going back to his own universe and saving his father because the multiverse might collapse.
It's literally not every single Spider-Person. When Miguel traps Miles during the intervention, Gwen Stacy and Peter B. Parker are actively arguing against Miguel for his decision. And like I mentioned earlier, Spider-Punk advocated for Miles to escape, so it quite literally is not every single Spider-Person.
Bullshit!
Kinda the point. Miles doesn't want to let the canon event go through. He wants to save his father. That's literally the reason why Miles is doing what he's doing.
Also, kind of unrelated to the canon breaking stuff, but since we are already talking about this part of the film, I'll mention it. Across the Spider-Verse takes place just 16 months after the events of the first Spider-Verse, meaning Miles Morales is still far from, shall we say, seasoned as Spider-Man at this point. He's still got much to learn, more experience to be had, and yet this movie wants you to buy that he can plausibly escape from hundreds of other, likely more seasoned Spider-Men and women who are more technologically advanced than him and likely have much more fucking experience than he does, as well as Spider-Man 2099 for that matter.
16 months is not that small of a time frame for someone to be Spider-Man, especially since Miles is still a pretty young kid. And being a kid while becoming Spider-Man this early does have an effect on how good he is at being Spider-Man. Miles got bit by the spider a couple years earlier than the actual Spider-Man did. It was even established in the beginning of the film that Miles has been doing great as Spider-Man. He managed to defeat a bunch of villains in the span of 16 months. If you were relatively speaking compared to other Spider people like Peter Parker in his universe or Peter B. Parker, you may have a point.
And this is what I was internally screaming for the entire duration of this chase sequence. Well, that and what the fuck did these idiots and Sony do to Peter B. Parker? Like, seriously, what the hell?
Look how they massacred my boy.
He's a borderline unrecognizable retard compared to his character from the first Spider-Verse, but I'll save that rant for my full review.
Did we watch the same movie? Peter B. Parker was an incredibly depressed person in the first film. And the reason being is his divorce with MJ due to the fact that Peter was scared of the thought of having kids. But as he hung out more with Miles and became his mentor, it started to grow on him. Now in the second movie, he is literally a happy father, and he explained in the second movie that the reason he went through with it is because of Miles.
I thought that if I did a decent job raising her, that there was a chance she was gonna turn out like you. And that got me excited because you are a wonderful person, and I like being around you.
There has to be something seriously wrong with you if you think Peter B. Parker is worse than he was in the first film.
Moving on, towards the end of the chase sequence, Miguel O'Hara corners Miles, and as if enough damage hadn't already been done, he calls Miles the original Anomaly for what's going wrong with the multiverse. The Spider-Man who should never have been bitten in the first place. Everything's going wrong because of him. He's the reason that his universe's Peter Parker died. He died because The spider that bit him came from Universe 42, and that universe was left without a Spider-Man, which led to its own set of repercussions for that universe, and so every event that's gone wrong with the multiverse, including Spot himself, is all because of him.
Miguel said all of this because in this scene he's very clearly angry. Miguel builds up adrenaline twice as fast than any other Spider-Man, and as a result, he lets out all of his frustration on Miles and points the blame at him for everything that's been going on. Obviously, when a person's angry, they're going to exaggerate the scale of their problems. Miles couldn't possibly be the sole fault of things like the existence of Spot, or Peter Parker dying, because the main factor of how everything's led up to this point is because of Kingpin's Super Collider.
Let's pause here because there's something else I need to address about this line and Miguel's character before we go any further. See, in the continuity of the Spider-Verse films, Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, was introduced to us back in the post-credit scene of Into the Spider-Verse.
The multiverse didn't collapse.
Oh, cool. So we're just gonna roll the dice on this?
So what do you say, pal?
Let's start at the beginning, one last time.
I just told you that. Listen, I'm from the future.
How dare you point at me?
Now, a lot of people, myself included, were very confused about Miguel's sudden change in demeanor in Across the Spider-Verse. Going from a charming, charismatic, snarky do-gooder who doesn't take himself too seriously, into his more grim and depressing antagonistic self in Across the Spider-Verse. Some people justify this with the trauma Miguel has experienced that profoundly changed him in the time gap between the two Spider-Verse films.
I hate to break it to you, but if you don't know anything about Miguel O'Hara from the comics, I don't know what to tell you. If the Miguel O'Hara in Across the Spider-Verse is the same one from the comics, he is literally a demented psychopath that's killed people, among a ton of other fucked up things he's done. Also, you are confusing the time frame for when all of this happened. 16 months have passed only for Miles Morales. That doesn't mean 16 months have passed everywhere else. Keep in mind that every Spider-Person is from an alternate dimension. The time frame it took for Miguel O'Hara to recruit the entire Spider Society or witnessing his dimension unravel is really up for speculation. I mean, it's literally in his name, Spider-Man 2099.
But to stay on point, Miguel was apparently watching over the multiverse during Into the Spider-Verse, observing the events of Kingpin's Super Collider going haywire, opening up the multiverse and then having Miles close it. His AI says that they avoided disaster and that the multiverse didn't collapse.
I was gone for less than 2 hours. What happened?
The multiverse didn't collapse.
Oh, cool.
And only then does he obtain the multiverse wristwatch that allows him to transport himself freely throughout the multiverse.
Hey, did you finish the goober?
It's not a goober, it's a gizmo. But you could be the first person to make an autonomous multiverse jump.
Okay, first off, Spider-Man 2099 is basically portrayed as like this multiverse law enforcement in these movies. So why was he even watching the multiverse if he had no means of traveling throughout or having any effect on it whatsoever?
I'm sorry, why wouldn't he be watching over the multiverse while developing a device to go traveling different dimensions exactly? I'm very confused by your question here. Of course Miguel O'Hara is going to keep check of the state of the multiverse when he acts as a guardian for its stability. This is like questioning why people in real life would study space before developing means of space travel.
The multiverse is apparently safe, and that would appear to be that.
Yeah, but there's one small issue with that statement, buddy. Lila never said that the multiverse was safe. All she said was that the multiverse didn't collapse. That doesn't mean the multiverse is safe.
However, Across the Spider-Verse would have you believe that Miguel has been at this multiverse spider cop canon breaking prevention crap for much longer than the timeline has room for. His traumatic backstory, which we will soon talk about, as well as recruiting the entire Spider Society with hundreds of Spider-Men and women and animals as well, mind you, as well as mapping out all this universe canon and capturing all those anomalies from Kingpin's Super Collider. That was, according to him, supposed to be the inciting event for all of this chaos, despite the fact that the Into the Spider-Verse post-credit scene said that the multiverse was saved, with no mentions of destabilization whatsoever. Remember, according to Across the Spider-Verse, all of this was supposed to happen within 16 months of the events of Into the Spider-Verse. Press X to doubt.
No, 16 months passed for Miles Morales. That does not mean 16 months have passed everywhere else. Miguel O'Hara is literally capable of time travel, and he's also from the future. It's in the name, Spider-Man 2099, which means he is from the year 2099. And with that into consideration, the time frame it took for Miguel to do all of those things is up for speculation.
Which brings me to the crux of the issue, which is that Miguel O'Hara, despite what some people believe, wasn't character developed from Into the Spider-Verse. He was instead very likely retconned and repurposed for this new plotline that the writers wanted to tell.
How in the bloody hell is that a retcon? It's literally sticking to his character. If you haven't noticed by now, Miguel O'Hara handles being Spider-Man way differently than everyone else. By definition, Miguel O'Hara is not even Spider-Man. He has no spider sense, he cannot climb walls naturally, he has fangs and talons. He's basically half man, half spider. He's not like any of the other spider people.
You would have stopped the collider before it ever went off. Spot wouldn't exist, and none of this would happen.
Okay, wait. Hold the fuck up, because this could not be any more stupid, especially coming from Miguel O'Hara. As far as the events pertaining to Miles' own universe, that being Earth 1610, what Miguel is saying is mostly true. Oh, we will come back to that. But in terms of the wider scope of the multiverse being in crisis and Miles being the first anomaly, given how Across the Spider-Verse chooses to portray Miguel's character, the implications of his tragic backstory, his long history with trying to stabilize the multiverse, the formation of the Spider Society, and the ridiculously short time gap between this movie and its prequel, when you take into account all that, Miles being the first anomaly is incredibly hard to believe. He's seen firsthand the consequences of what trying to change canon events can do to a universe, where in an admission of guilt, he explains he tried replacing another version of himself in another universe, and that universe, as a result of too much canon being changed, was ultimately destroyed, meaning Miguel broke the rules of the multiverse first, and Miguel was the original anomaly who caused an instability in the multiverse long before Miles did.
No, Miles is still the original anomaly, even with Miguel breaking the canon himself, because again, Miguel is from a completely different timeline set in the future, and he is way ahead of Miles in that regard. With that into consideration, that still makes Miles the original anomaly according to Miguel. Not to mention, Miles' super collider had an effect on all universes, but it doesn't have the effect happen at the same time frame for every other universe.
Meaning all of his accusations against Miles are completely dumb as fuck. Not only that, but because Sony, in their infinite lack of wisdom and insistent on sucking Marvel and Disney's continuously rotting dick, decided to retroactively tie in MCU continuity with the continuity of Into the Spider-Verse. Meaning the events of Spider-Man No Way Home and Peter Parker's really stupid request from Doctor Strange's dumbass spell led to anomalies happening and the multiverse destabilizing before Miles destroyed Kingpin's super collider, unless this movie has insisted that Miles destabilized the multiverse before the events of No Way Home, and then there's the multiverse of madness to consider, and not to mention Loki, and the fact that Miguel mentions Doctor Strange by name when he first meets Gwen in Across the Spider-Verse. And let me just stop here and cast the middle finger at Sony, saying this is why you don't attach your entire separate, self-contained IP and its continuity to the fucking MCU, or any other continuity for that matter.
Spider-Verse was never self-contained. It's in the name, Spider-Verse. By proxy, these movies are connected with the MCU. I don't know how you missed that at all.
Retroactively, because that's a surefire way to fuck your continuity straight in the ass.
Does it really though? Like I mentioned earlier, they take place in entirely different universes. I don't see how this could screw over the continuity simply because the MCU version of the Prowler made a cameo appearance.
Spider-Verse was just fucking fine on its own. It didn't need any of this, and it was all the better for it. But attaching this to the MCU would have been bad enough when the MCU was good. The MCU is currently in freefall.
Irrelevant.
Apparently, producer Phil Lord had nothing but giddy excitement at the idea of joining Kevin Feige's sinking mothership. So maybe this dumb decision wasn't all Sony's doing after all. But the irony behind this particular tweet is also nothing short of delicious. And it goes like this. Marvel has given us a lot of rope to make MCU connections. It has been a very fruitful collaboration. Kevin's a big admirer, and just believes a rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah, I wasn't kidding when I equated the current state of the MCU to the Titanic.
So because they dared to put any inkling of resemblance to the MCU in their new movie, that gives you a reason to unjustifiably tear the movie apart. If anything, that makes you just as bad as the Marvel fanboys that you love shitting on a lot.
Everything burns.
And this film has already made great strides towards that. As I said, Spider-Verse was better left on its own.
Spiderverse. It's in the name. By definition, this movie was never self-contained like you love to claim it was.
But what I find curious about this is that, again, when they travel to Mumbattan, there is another Alchemax with yet another super collider, meaning that Kingpin's super collider couldn't have been the only inciting incident for setting the multiverse out of balance, because, logically speaking here, there's more super colliders out there in the multiverse, which likely should have been activated along with the super collider from Earth 1610.
Why on God's green earth would the super collider in Mumbattan activate at the exact same time as the super collider in Miles' universe? By your same logic, everyone in the Spider Society would have become Spider-Man in the exact same time, which in that case, say goodbye to Spider-Man Noir, say goodbye to Penny Parker, say goodbye to Miles Morales, say goodbye to Peter Porker, say goodbye to Spider-Man 2099, say goodbye to Spider-Gwen, say goodbye to any other Spider-Man that did not become Spider-Man the exact same time. It's like everything about this movie just went over your head.
Meaning this was going to happen anyway, and shouldn't these events have happened before the events of Into the Spider-Verse? And again, why is Miguel putting all of this on Miles when he broke canon first and caused the whole universe to be wiped out, which I'd imagine did much more damage to the space-time continuum than anything the Super Collider could have done?
By technicality, Miles would still be the original Anomaly due to the fact that Miguel and Miles are in entirely separate timelines. Miguel, once again, is from the year 2099, which is way ahead of Miles' timeline.
In regards to the canon event-breaking bullshit, which again was stupid to begin with, because again, the canon that Miles apparently broke in Mumbattan is because of an Anomaly who invaded that universe and brought about that event to happen in the first place, meaning the supposed canon event that was always supposed to happen was complete bullshit.
No, regardless of what caused the canon event, the Super Collider was supposed to go off. How it was supposed to go off is subject to change, but all that matters is that the Super Collider explodes. That is how the canon event is supposed to go.
However, Miguel does point out during his fight with Miles that the Peter Parker from Earth 1610, that being Miles' universe, was meant to stop the Collider, which would lead one to believe by this film's own logic that the stopping of the Super Collider is indeed a canon event.
No, the canon event isn't Spider-Man stopping the Collider. The canon event is the Collider exploding. Miles really had no impact on what happened in there, since the main factor on why the Collider exploded was because Green Goblin shoved Peter Parker into the beam of the Collider. This is why I must reiterate, even though Spot, an Anomaly, was the cause of Mumbattan's Collider exploding, that still means the Collider exploded, which ties into the canon event of that Spider-Man's universe. It fits the bill on when it happened too, since it takes place during a battle against an arch-nemesis.
And in all the other universes that Spider-Man is supposed to stop the Super Collider, including the Super Collider in Mumbattan, where the Super Collider only goes off because of Spot, who was an Anomaly, remember, and without him, the Spider-Man from that universe would have stopped it, further making the supposed canon event of Inspector Sing's death nonsensical.
That would be true if the canon event was supposed to be Spider-Man stopping the Super Collider, which it isn't.
And this is the deal breaker, might I add. There is nothing these smooth-brained, fanatical fuckwits can say or come up with that will ever plug this movie's biggest plot hole, which is the fact that Miles, being an Anomaly, breaks the entire premise, ironically enough, of this whole multiverse, canon-breaking plotline bullshit.
Anomaly. This may sound batshit insane to you, but what if that's the point? What if the point of the entire movie is that Miles wants to prove Miguel wrong about breaking the canon events and that he could still potentially save his father from dying a horrific death? What if I told you that this was hinted at in the film due to the fact that Gwen Stacy's dad quit his job at being a police officer and thus makes him less vulnerable to dying in a canon event since he is no longer going to be captain? Maybe that's why Gwen Stacy formed a group of spider people at the end of the movie, which happens to include Penny Parker and Spider Avatar, formerly on the side of Miguel O'Hara. Did that just completely fly over your head?
Meaning the rift in the multiverse that Miles supposedly created, press X to doubt, that event wasn't supposed to happen. So Inspector Singh not dying from an Anomaly is breaking enough canon to unravel the multiverse, but Miles being an anomaly and breaking dozens if not hundreds of canon events for the Peter Parker in his universe leaves Earth 1610 completely unscathed. Get fucked. By this movie's own retarded logic, Earth 1610 should be a fucking black hole by now, and we haven't even discussed the other side of this coin, that being Earth 42. This universe had its radioactive spider stolen by Earth 1610, leaving Earth 42 without a Spider-Man, and basically fucked up the entire universe's Spider-Man canon from start to finish. Which means that Earth 42, like Earth 1610, should have fucking imploded on itself during the events of Into the Spider-Verse.
On paper, this is a good observation, but that is until you dig deeper into the canon events between Miles and Miguel. Miguel tampered with the canon in his universe because of something that had already happened, which was the death of that version of himself, and by replacing him with his current self, that makes a continuity error, which is why his universe got destroyed. Miles getting bitten by the spider from Earth 42, on the other hand, is not a continuity error, because by the time the spider bit Miles, nobody in Earth 42 was made into Spider-Man yet. Combine this with the fact that Miguel may not be telling the full truth regarding canon events, because again, we see that Gwen Stacy's father avoids being caught into a canon event due to the fact he quit his job and is no longer going to be police captain. The whole point of Across the Spider-Verse is that Miles wants to accomplish what Miguel and others deem as impossible. To quote Gwen Stacy,
One thing I learned from Miles, it's all possible.
Also, if we're going by your logic, then the first movie should have never happened, period. Do you see the problem with taking Miguel's word at face value?
But nope, they're both fine, because Lord and Miller decided to cook up this bullshit canon crap after the original film, and tried to tie that in retroactively with the continuity that they had already established, as well as other continuities as well, and in doing so, basically fucked the very definition of the word continuity to pieces. It's funny how none of this was brought up while Miguel and the Spider Society were stupidly grilling Miles about having to let his father die because of this contrived, broken canon bullshit that again was only cooked up to incite drama between Miles and Miguel.
How on earth is it only made to incite drama between Miles and Miguel? That is such an unbelievably disingenuous way of oversimplifying an important plotline of the movie. No, it's not made to incite drama between Miles and Miguel, it's made to increase the stakes for Miles and others, as well as expanding the multiverse that was shown to us in the first movie. To dumb it down as inciting drama between Miles and Miguel is very much a straw man. It also misses the point on the entire movie.
Of course, this room full of geniuses, remember, would just outright ignore this very blatant contradiction to this logic because it would have created this movie's plot and its drama.
Once again, must point out that he completely leaves out Spider-Punk entirely when it comes to Miles finding out that his dad is part of a canon event. He doesn't even mention Hobie by name. It's incredibly misleading to say that every single Spider-Person blindly follows Miguel when you completely ignore the one character that helps out Miles in that very moment. And not to mention Gwen Stacy and Peter B. Parker arguing against Miguel for locking up Miles in a cell. Also, a pretty good reason as to why a good portion of the Spider Society believes Miguel regarding canon events is that Miguel is the only Spider-Man that is qualified in his studies of such. He is the only one that has made studies on time travel and alternate dimensions. Of course, when Miguel is this smart, others will believe him.
Oh, it's just a mess. It's just an absolute fucking mess, and the longer you pull back the layers on why none of this makes any fucking sense, it, pun very much intended, is a gigantic web of clusterfuckery horseshit. Which again, ironically, was trying to tie everything together with canon, but all it actually did was destroy any semblance of continuity in the Spider-Verse films by trying to conform to other continuities that Spider-Verse was never meant to be a part of because it was doing just fucking fine on its own.
For the last time, Spider-Verse was never supposed to be self-contained. It is in the name. Please stop this nonsense about it being its own separate series. It's not.
Which again, is a damn shame since I was once looking forward to seeing how the Spider-Verse films would do, and how they would continue despite my issues with the first film. But not so much anymore. The plot is so nonsensical and the canon is so fucked that I've all but entirely soured on this series prior to the conclusion of the trilogy. Honestly, at this point, I don't even know if I'm going to give the third film a chance.
Hey, it's your funeral. Your dumbass wants to give Avatar 3 a chance instead because you have no real standard for good movies. With that, we reach the end of his first video. Now let's get to his follow-up. This is nothing but a giant cope session over the fact that Spiderverse fans pointed out the possibility of Miguel being wrong about canon events. And he will proceed to generalize this audience as blind idiots that see no flaws in the movie whatsoever. He did the same thing to people that criticized Avatar 2: The Way of Water, which, by the way, he made an 8-hour long defense for both movies. It kinda comes off as being contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian. Anyways, let's break down his follow-up.
Welcome back to the channel, everyone. It's your pal Noms here. And wouldn't you know it, my last video stirred such a hornet's nest of copium surrounding Across the Spider-Verse's really dumb plot.
I'm still finding this part incredibly ironic. He will dismiss any criticism from these people and regard them as copium-obsessed fanboys, but this is the same person that tried deflecting any and all criticism towards the Avatar series with an 8-hour long cope session of a defense. With all this in mind, I don't think you're any better than the supposed Marvel fanboys. And also, I can guarantee you that most people that have watched both Spider-Verse movies absolutely hate the current state of the MCU. I hate its current state, my friends don't like it, a lot of people don't. Yet, we enjoyed both Spider-Verse movies regardless.
Not only, and very ironically mind you, broke the continuity of Into the Spider-Verse and other Spider-Man continuities it retroactively tries to tie into, and finally creates a broken and contradictive premise for the movie and its upcoming sequel that makes absolutely no sense timeline-wise, both for how much time has passed since the events of Into the Spider-Verse, as well as the events of Into the Spider-Verse itself, which obviously were not written with the plot of this sequel in mind, considering that the logic or lack thereof in Across the Spider-Verse for how canon breaking rips the universe apart.
He says Into the Spider-Verse was written with no sequel in mind, yet the post-credit scene says otherwise because it's literally building up Spider-Man 2099 and the multiverse.
Would have rendered Universe 1610 and Universe 42 having imploded on itself the moment Miles Morales was bitten by the radioactive spider.
If you watched Anomaly's original video, you may have noticed that I cut a few parts of his video out, and that's because he just fucking repeats himself. So yeah, I'm not going to include any more clips like that.
See, I kept getting this very persistent rebuttal spat back at me whenever I'm critical of the already shot to shit canon plotline of the Spider-Verse sequels, and I say sequels because I refuse to let this really dumb plot choice drag down the far superior original film, which, unlike Spider-Man No Way Home and Across the Spider-Verse, had a much better grasp of how the multiverse is meant to work.
But the first movie barely went into the multiverse itself.
But whenever I outline how nonsensical the canon-breaking event bullshit is, even when it's not stupidly retroactively trying to tie in with other continuities in order to try and rewrite the entire fucking franchise for these writers' own selfish spite towards the fans of Peter Parker and over 60 years of comic book stories that come with that character.
You say that this movie spites fans of the original comics and the very idea of Spider-Man, yet not only did everyone love the movie and thought of it as like a love letter to Spider-Man fans, but the movie, just like the first one, is very self-referential, and in no way does it ever go against the original comics. If anything, you have showcased that you don't really know that much about Spider-Man like you love to claim.
See, the rebuttal that apparently nullifies all of this and makes all this canon crap okay is, what if Miguel O'Hara is actually wrong about the canon? Some people are insisting that Miguel isn't telling Miles the truth in order to cover his tracks.
No, it's not that Miguel is trying to cover his tracks, it's that he could just be flat out wrong. This is why Miles is doing what he does in the movie. He wants to prove Miguel wrong, and he wants to try his damnedest to save his father despite Miguel's entire exposition of canon events. It's a bit of a shtick to Miguel's character that he's very full of himself to the point he will say something with such confidence but still be wrong.
I've got enough to deal with. You can't mean that. You can't just ignore that she's in danger. Hey, I'm trying to focus on what's important. What's important is not standing by and allowing someone to suffer or die because you do nothing. If you don't get that, then you don't get the first thing about being Spider-Man.
Or in fact, there's this other theory that it's Spot that is actually causing everything to go wrong, and Miguel is accusing Miles under false pretenses, or some other butt-fuck wild theory for why the canon-breaking nonsense criticism is supposedly unfounded and moronic.
It's never been disproved that the cause of Peter's world unraveling was because of Spot. This is something that Miles actually argues Miguel with when he brings up the fact he disrupted a canon event. It's not like Spot became super powerful after destroying the Collider, so who's to say that he didn't open a black hole there?
Noms, didn't you know that the film is perfectly self-aware about the canon breaking being nonsensical? Oh my gosh, how can you completely miss this point? Well, dipshit, obviously you missed the part where I previously discussed how the movie already validated Miguel's theory and treats it as factual.
How has Miguel's theory on canon events been proven factual? We saw one anecdote of his that showcased his own universe collapsing, and they also showcased several anomalies existing that have not caused any sort of calamity to the multiverse. That's kind of the whole point of the movie. Not to mention that Miguel's anecdote was him trying to correct a canon event after it happened, not stopping it entirely.
And yes, you bigoted monster, Miles has just as much of a right to be Spider-Man as Peter Parker, and you must like him. Anyone can wear the mask, damn it!
You can tell that Anomaly's taking Miguel's word at face value, which is pretty dumb. In this scene, Miguel is very obviously angry at Miles. This is literally part of his character. Miguel is straight up an asshole towards a lot of people. This doesn't mean Miles doesn't actually fit in to be Spider-Man. In fact, Miles' mother gives him an entire talk about how Miles should never feel like he doesn't belong anywhere.
Wherever you go from here, you have to promise to take care of that little boy for me. And he never lets anyone at those big fancy places he's gonna be in tell him that he doesn't belong there.
It also doesn't make sense how you call out the writers for spreading the message that anyone can wear the mask when that is the biggest message that the first Spider-Verse movie was trying to tell. Mary Jane's speech early on in the first movie was about how anyone could be Spider-Man, and this was after Peter Parker was killed.
Comic book first came out, there were people who were rejecting Miles as a character, for their reasons, not how we think it should be, and we wanted to talk directly to that and actually almost stick it to that mentality of no, anyone can wear the mask.
Yeah, writers, go fuck yourselves for giving credence to the vocal, microscopic fucking minority of 5 people who hated Miles Morales.
Except it wasn't a small vocal minority. They are obviously referring to the original comic book that came out years and years before Spider-Verse. People did not like Miles Morales because in the comics, he basically had no character, and due to this, he was deemed as not fit for Spider-Man among the masses. It wasn't until Spider-Verse came along that Miles actually had a character and people started to like him.
Whilst casting the middle finger at millions upon millions of people who adore Peter Parker and never had a problem with Miles Morales, especially from Into the Spider-Verse, until you decided to spite them, giving them an actual valid reason for having distaste towards the character, given how his entire story in the sequel was designed to put him on this morally righteous fucking pedestal and take a giant shit on the character of Peter Parker in not just the Spider-Verse continuity, but every fucking continuity.
I still don't understand how Anomaly comes to the conclusion that the writers made this movie out of spite towards fans of Peter Parker. It goes to show you that people like this don't know that much about Spider-Man to begin with.
See, here's the thing. Spider-Verse simps, when it comes to Miguel O'Hara's canon-breaking theory, that he's generated this entire algorithm to support, not only if he's wrong, does it break continuity that Across the Spider-Verse has already established, rendering it completely inconsistent, since, as I already mentioned, Across the Spider-Verse has already showed cause and effect that canon breaking does in fact unravel the multiverse, since Miles apparently already broke canon by saving Inspector Singh from a very clearly non-canon event, which was still treated as one, and immediately starts to unravel the universe that Mumbattan exists in.
Again, the canon event is that the Collider in Mumbattan is supposed to explode and kill Inspector Singh. How the Collider explodes is irrelevant. What matters is that it fucking exploded. Kind of like the Collider in Miles' universe.
Like I said, some people speculate that it was Spot causing the instability in Mumbattan, and that the black hole in Mumbattan wasn't the result of a canon event being broken, but that doesn't line up with the timeline at all, since this has apparently happened in other universes before Spot fucking figured out how to travel across the multiverse.
Again, if you're referring to Miguel's universe, that takes place in an entirely different timeline.
And the fact that Miguel caused an entire universe to collapse on itself just for living in it after a version of himself was killed. So if Miguel is wrong, then how the fuck does that make any sense?
Well, let me put it in perspective for you. You don't see a black hole when Miguel's universe collapses, do ya? It's also the fact that you don't really understand how the multiverse works and are assuming that what Miguel did happened first rather than what Spot did.
But wait! There's more!
Not only, if Miguel O'Hara is wrong, does that render all of this canon-breaking, multiverse rule crap completely meaningless, and therefore the inciting catalyst for his drama with Miles Morales completely meaningless as well.
How? Just because Miguel is wrong about one thing doesn't mean an entire plotline is meaningless. The entire point of Miguel's character is that he thinks he's the authority on everything, and he's kinda wrong about everything. This was a thing established in the original comics. In fact, in the movie, he's wrong about what it means to be Spider-Man. Quote, "Being Spider-Man is a sacrifice. That's what you signed up for. Spider-Man is not about sacrifice, it's about saving people." That should tell you everything about Miguel and his theory.
The fact that the writers deliberately wrote that Miles wouldn't immediately point this out just to continue its dumbass plot speaks wonders, but the really awful fact of the matter is, not only does Miles not point this out, nobody does! Because A, everyone is an idiot in this movie, when again they're meant to be geniuses, remember? Remember, these are all Spider people, Peter Parker is a genius, and all of these fuckers are meant to be super smart. Remember, geniuses, and none of them fucking point this out. Reason B, nobody points this out because Miguel is in fact correct, and the movie treats his canon algorithm as a correct phenomenon.
No, the Spider people are assuming that Miguel's theory is correct, and they believe Miguel's theory because he is the only Spider-Man in the Spider Society that has the expertise on things like time travel and alternate dimensions. And for the last time, Anomaly, not everybody follows Miguel's lead, because you still fail to mention the one very important character that goes entirely against your argument. You are still leaving out the fact that Spider-Punk was entirely against Miguel, and he was only there to help Miles. Why are you leaving him out entirely, Anomaly?
Except the film, as I previously stated, was simply picking and choosing when the canon breaking matters.
I'm gonna have to ask you to elaborate on that, buddy, because guess what? Throughout the entire movie when Miguel is present, he always brings up the canon. Even in the very beginning of the movie when he's in Gwen's universe. Not only that, but the entire second half of the movie is completely focused on that. And right after Spot explodes the Super Collider in Mumbattan, Lila gives Gwen a warning that a canon event is on its way. The only real time that the canon events are not the important part of the movie at the moment are when Miles is conflicting with his family. Other than that one part of the movie, canon events become a pretty big part of the movie overall.
Lastly, and more to the widely accepted criticism of every Peter Parker just blindly buying into Miguel's canon logic.
It's technically not blind, since Miguel is the only one that has the expertise on time travel and alternate dimensions, but whatever floats your boat, buddy.
And casting aside their principles, their entire character in fact, and all of the qualities that define their heroism in favor of letting innocent people die, even if it's Uncle Ben.
Okay, let me put it in the most simplest way I can for your dumbass. The reason why these Spider people are allowing the fact that Miles' dad may die in tragedy is because they themselves have gone through said tragedy. Every single one of them. Due to the fact that all of these people went through a canon event, it is deemed all throughout the Spider Society as a thing that needs to happen. And this is why they take Miguel's word at face value. Now, with that being said, Miles is going against what Miguel theorizes, and he wants to accomplish what is deemed to be impossible, which is the entire point of the movie. It's setting up these canon events to challenge Miles to try and save his father despite what everyone else thinks. The fact you cannot put two and two together is actually hilarious to me.
Which is certainly better than the alternative, because if Miguel is wrong, as some of these Spider-Verse fanatics are insisting on, that means every single Peter Parker blindly followed his logic and let countless people die for absolutely nothing!
Anomaly, do you only think in black and white? Just because these Spider people accepted Miguel's word, that doesn't mean they're blind and stupid. People like Peter B. Parker, Gwen Stacy, and Hobie actively go against Miguel's stance. Spider Avatar and Penny Parker literally join Gwen Stacy to resolve this conflict. Also, how are they the ones following Miguel for absolutely nothing? They aren't letting people die for the sake of it because they already went through their canon events. The fuck are you smoking?
Further sticking it to fans of Peter Parker who, the majority of which had no issue whatsoever with the character of Miles Morales, but who the writers were just oh so insecure about. So they tried to quote-unquote stick it to them for thinking the role of Peter Parker and Spider-Man should be unique and special for the character.
Again, when they talk about how Miles was hated as a character, they were referring to the original comics, and yes, the original Miles Morales comics were bad. Also, these movies are not made to spite fans of Spider-Man, and in no way have they ever gone against how Spider-Man's journey is supposed to be unique. In fact, I would argue that Miles' journey in Spider-Verse so far is one of the most unique journeys we've ever witnessed in a movie.
We wanted to talk directly to that and actually almost stick it to that mentality of, no, anyone can wear the mask.
It was bad enough making every single Peter Parker that ever existed an idiot, just unanimously buying into Miguel's retarded logic without protest. They're all just stupid, hive-minded idiots now.
See? All Anomaly does is think in black and white. Just because the Spider Society follows Miguel regarding canon events, that means they're just idiots. He just doesn't understand that Miguel is actually very smart in regards to time travel and alternate dimensions, and that no other Spider-Man has the expertise in that.
But to render that completely pointless and saying Miguel is wrong and the whole canon-breaking algorithm was nonsensical to begin with, despite the movie having shown, again, cause and effect for validating it.
You have yet to explain how Miguel's theory was validated in the movie. If you are talking about the super collider in Mumbattan collapsing in a black hole, well then, let me tell you something. Want to know what theme starts playing in the background as soon as Mumbattan starts unraveling? Spot's theme. There's your confirmation. Miguel used an anecdote which was based on correcting a canon event, not stopping it. And Spot nearly caused a canon event regardless of what the cause is. All Miles did was stop it from happening. Two entirely different scenarios.
Almost like the writers were projecting something about their targeted, fanatical fucking audience.
You're one to talk about fanatical audiences, Mr. 8-hour-long Avatar defense. Herder, James Cameron has a vision. Yeah, and that vision is shit.
But if this same rebuttal coming from these same fanatics insisting that Miguel being wrong is the point of Across the Spider-Verse, then that would be the ultimate middle finger at Peter Parker. And you know what? Maybe that is the purpose. You know what? I can totally buy at this point that Miguel O'Hara being wrong about the canon could be the big twist for the conclusion of the Spider-Verse trilogy, despite the fact that this would, again, contradict a shit ton of setup that Across the Spider-Verse established. But casting the middle finger at longtime fans of Peter Parker seems to be the point of the story that the writers are going for. So yes, they could very well pull the rug out from under the movie and say, psych, all that canon stuff was meaningless and Miguel was totally wrong. Congratulations, Spider-Verse fanatics, your theory would indeed be correct. Yet another occasion where the writers let the meta and the climate surrounding their story influence their fucking story instead of just telling the fucking story. But again, like I said, they can meta backtrack all the fuck they want, throw us a curveball and say Miguel was wrong about everything, but it ain't gonna save this shitty plot from being a pile of shit.
How did they focus too much on the meta? If anything, it was more like a healthy balance between meta and good storytelling, especially because Miles is trying to prevent something that is considered meta. By definition as well, the first Spider-Verse was considered meta. I also don't like how you were quick to assume that this will be the case, because we actually don't know what's going to happen. Miles could save his dad, Miles' dad could die, Spot could destroy the entire multiverse, Miguel could stop Miles from disrupting a canon event. Maybe there's a plot twist regarding Miguel or anyone else. A lot of things could happen, but the thing is, we don't know. You are judging this off of the first act of a two-part film. For all we know, things in the Spider-Verse could end very badly. So really, a lot of this flack towards the writers is very much unwarranted.
In fact, one could argue it would actually make things worse. And like I said previously, the damage has already been done. They've already laid precedent for the plot to go in one direction. So if the twist is, yeah, not really, and all that canon stuff becomes meaningless because Miguel turned out to be wrong, well then it's just going to be fucking so amusing seeing the explanation they cook up to retroactively explain away all this shit, and not to mention all the brand new problems that will arise as a result.
Most of these problems you're going to have with the third film are most likely because a lot of things went over that dense head of yours. You actually believe that the time gap between every single thing that's happened in every single universe was just 16 months. That's not how it works, buddy. Maybe you should take into consideration that time travel is a thing and revise your script a little. And that's just one example of how you completely misinterpreted what the film was going for.
Maybe next time they'll just focus on telling a good story instead of projecting their insecurities about their characters supposedly not being liked back onto fans loyal to the franchise and the character of Spider-Man, and letting that dictate the course of their story.
So spreading the message of anyone can wear the mask in a second movie that was previously stated in the first movie, which might I add you yourself admitted was a great movie, is a problem, and that the writers are somehow insecure about it despite the fact that it's just to improve a character that was previously notorious for having no character. Do you like Spider-Verse or not?
Now I need all of you to listen carefully for what I'm about to say next. I don't like when people use the criticism of they should have done this or they should have done that. In fact, I consider it a non-starter when it comes to criticizing movies or anything really. We are the audience. We are there to indulge someone else's story, not our own. And I absolutely despise how people can sometimes use their personal wish list as some sort of crutch for criticizing a movie they don't like, simply because they didn't get what they want, or because they thought they could do it better, because I have zero interest in some other audience member's personal fucking checklist for how someone else's story should go. So that being said, this plot is so batshit fucking baffling to me that of all the fucking directions they could have gone in with a Spider-Verse sequel having the multiverse as a premise to utilize however they see fit, and this was the story they chose to tell. Not to mention, they could have chosen any fucking Spider-Man characters they wanted to be a part of the main ensemble cast of characters. And this is what they chose. And what they ended up doing was trivializing the multiverse, the character of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, pushing a very on-the-nose agenda of politically woke garbage, and shoving a metric quantum fuckton of cameos in there to boot in order to cushion the blow for so many that would have no doubt called this film out otherwise, but didn't because Sony knew just how fucking shallow those reviewers truly are.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, you're literally starting the statement off with contradicting yourself with how you don't like critics making the criticism of they should have done this instead, so nice job there. Secondly, you have completely failed to explain how the adventures of Peter Parker have been absolutely trivialized by this film, since in no way does it even remotely affect the journeys at all, and arguably the movie made a much more unique Spider-Man journey out of it by introducing these canon events to a character like Miles. And lastly, the wokeness in Spider-Verse are things you would have to actively look for and make a problem. For those that don't know, there are a few hidden things in Spider-Verse that people are pointing out as woke. Miles has a Black Lives Matter sticker on his backpack, Gwen has a Protect Trans Kids flag in her room, and Spider-Punk made a capitalism joke, among other things. A lot of these are surface value non-issues with the movie, and you'd have to be there actively making it a problem, because none of these are even relevant to the main plot of the movie. And with that, we have finally reached the end of Anomaly Inc's thoughts on Spider-Verse 2. He has completely missed the mark on criticizing this movie in any way, shape, or form. A lot of his criticisms are straight up misinformed and completely disingenuous, especially when he completely leaves out one entire character in the movie that could go against his entire argument. I honestly don't know how you could screw up a review this bad, and this isn't even his full review of the movie. It's just him ranting about a non-issue because he failed to get the point of the entire movie's plot. I also feel as though a lot of his issues with the movie come from the fact that he doesn't really know anything about the characters from the comic books, because if he did, he would probably understand a lot more on what Spider-Verse is going for. Special thanks to Psychonautic Therapy and some guy online for helping me make this video, and thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe because I need clout.